Sarah Mitchell had been driving trucks for nearly 8 years, and she had seen just about everything the highway could throw at her. The sun was beginning to set over the interstate as she guided her massive 18-wheeler toward a truck stop just outside Memphis. Her shoulders ached from the long haul, and her eyes burned from staring at the endless stretch of asphalt that seemed to go on forever. She needed coffee, a hot meal, and maybe 20 minutes to stretch her legs before getting back on the road. The truck stop was busy when she pulled in. Rows of big rigs lined the parking lot, their engines creating a low rumble that vibrated through the evening air. Sarah maneuvered her truck into an empty spot with practiced ease, the kind of precision that came from years of experience. She killed the engine and sat there for a moment, letting the silence wash over her. Through her windshield, she could see other truckers heading into the main building, probably looking for the same thing she was. She climbed down from the cab, her boots hitting the pavement with a solid thud. The evening air was warm and humid, carrying the smell of diesel fuel and fried food from the diner inside. Sarah stretched her arms above her head, feeling her spine pop in several places. She grabbed her wallet from the truck and started walking toward the building, already thinking about that cup of coffee. Inside the truck stop, the fluorescent lights were harsh after the dim evening outside. The place was packed with drivers, some eating at the diner counter, others browsing the aisles of the convenience store section. Sarah made her way to the coffee station, grabbing the largest cup they had. She filled it with the dark, strong brew that truck stops were famous for, the kind that could keep you alert for another 100 miles. As she turned toward the register, she noticed a group of 3 men standing near the entrance. They were younger than most of the truckers in the place, probably in their late 20s. Something about them seemed off. They were not dressed like drivers, and they had a restless energy that made Sarah's instincts kick in. She had learned over the years to trust those instincts. They were talking loudly, laughing in a way that seemed forced, and their eyes kept scanning the room. Sarah paid for her coffee and decided to grab something to eat before heading back out. She moved toward the diner section, trying to ignore the uncomfortable feeling that was settling in her stomach. The truck stop diner was classic Americana, with red vinyl booths, a long counter with spinning stools, and a menu that promised everything from pancakes to meatloaf. She slid into a booth near the window where she could keep an eye on her truck. A waitress came by and Sarah ordered a cheeseburger and fries. While she waited, she sipped her coffee and watched the parking lot through the window. The sky was darkening now, turning deep purple and orange where the sun had disappeared below the horizon. Other trucks continued to pull in and out, their headlights cutting through the growing darkness. It was a scene she had witnessed 1,000 times before, and there was something comforting about its familiarity. Her food arrived quickly, and Sarah ate while scrolling through her phone, checking messages from her dispatcher and her sister back home. The burger was greasy and perfect, exactly what she needed after a long day on the road. She took her time eating, not rushing like she usually did. Something made her want to stay inside a little longer, though she could not quite put her finger on what. When she finally finished and paid her bill, it was fully dark outside. The parking lot was illuminated by tall sodium lights that cast everything in an orange glow. Sarah pushed through the door and stepped back into the humid night air. The group of 3 men she had noticed earlier was now standing near the fuel pumps, still talking loudly. One of them looked in her direction as she walked past, and she felt his eyes follow her. She kept walking, her pace steady and confident. Sarah was not a small woman. Years of hauling freight and handling heavy equipment had made her strong, and she carried herself with the kind of assurance that usually kept trouble away. But as she approached her truck, she heard footsteps behind her. They were quick, purposeful. She did not turn around immediately, but her muscles tensed. The footsteps got closer, and then a voice called out. It was rough and slurred slightly, like the speaker had been drinking. Sarah stopped walking and turned around slowly. 2 of the men from the group were following her, and the third was hanging back near the building. The one who had called out was tall and thin, with a scraggly beard and eyes that looked unfocused. The other was shorter and stockier, with his hands shoved into his jacket pockets. Sarah kept her expression neutral. She had dealt with drunk idiots before, and the best strategy was usually to stay calm and not engage. She did not say anything, just looked at them with a steady gaze that said she was not interested in whatever they wanted. But the tall one kept talking, saying something crude about seeing a woman trucker and wanting to say hello. His tone made it clear that hello was not really what he was after. She turned back toward her truck, deciding that ignoring them was the best option. But the shorter man moved quickly, stepping around to block her path. Sarah stopped again, and this time her jaw tightened. She could feel the anger starting to build in her chest, but she kept it under control. Getting angry would not help the situation. She needed to stay smart. The tall one was behind her now, and the shorter one was in front. Sarah calculated her options. She could try to walk around him, but that would put her off balance. She could go back toward the building, but that meant moving toward the third man. Or she could stand her ground and make it clear she was not going to be intimidated. She chose the third option, planting her feet and crossing her arms over her chest. Her voice was low and firm when she finally spoke, telling them to back off and let her pass. But the shorter man laughed, and that was when Sarah knew this was not going to end peacefully. The shorter man stepped even closer, and Sarah could smell alcohol on his breath mixed with cigarette smoke. He was saying something about how she should be friendlier, how they just wanted to talk to her. His words were slurred and his movements were unsteady, but there was an aggressive edge to his demeanor that made Sarah's heart beat faster. She had been in uncomfortable situations before, but this felt different. This felt dangerous. Sarah kept her voice steady and repeated her demand for them to move. She made eye contact with the shorter man, trying to show him that she was not afraid, that she was not someone who would be easily pushed around. For a moment it seemed like he might actually listen. His expression flickered with something that might have been doubt. But then the tall one behind her said something encouraging him, and the moment passed. The shorter man reached out suddenly, grabbing at Sarah's arm. His fingers closed around her wrist and she felt a surge of adrenaline flood her system. She yanked her arm back hard, breaking his grip. Her voice was louder now, telling them to get away from her, that she was not playing around. A few other people in the parking lot were starting to notice the commotion. Sarah could see heads turning, could see other truckers pausing to look in their direction, but the two men did not back down. If anything, they seemed more aggressive now that she had resisted. The tall one moved closer, positioning himself so that Sarah was effectively boxed in between them and her truck. They were talking over each other now, their words jumbling together into a mess of slurred threats and crude comments. Sarah's mind was racing, running through her options. She could scream for help, but would anyone actually intervene? She could try to run, but they were between her and the safety of the building. The shorter man reached for her again, this time with both hands trying to grab her by the shoulders. Sarah reacted on instinct, bringing her arms up and knocking his hands away. She took a step back, but her back hit the side of her truck. She was trapped. The tall one was laughing now, a nasty sound that made her skin crawl. He said something about teaching her a lesson about respect. That was when everything changed. The shorter man, emboldened by alcohol and his friend's encouragement, drew his arm back. Sarah saw it coming, saw the fist forming, saw the intention in his eyes. Time seemed to slow down in that moment. She had just enough time to think that this was really happening, that this man was actually going to hit her, and then his fist connected with the side of her face. The pain was immediate and shocking. It felt like her whole head exploded with white-hot fire. Sarah stumbled to the side, her hand flying up to her face. She could taste blood in her mouth, could feel her cheek already starting to swell. Her vision blurred for a second and she heard ringing in her ears. The two men were still there, still talking, and she could hear them laughing. They thought this was funny. They thought hitting a woman in a parking lot was some kind of joke. But Sarah Mitchell was not the kind of woman who stayed down. The initial shock of the punch wore off almost immediately, replaced by something else. Anger. Pure, white-hot anger that burned away any fear or hesitation she had been feeling. She straightened up, her hand still on her face, and looked at the shorter man who had hit her. His expression was changing now, maybe realizing that he had made a mistake, but it was too late for regrets. Sarah had grown up with 3 older brothers who had taught her how to fight. She had worked in a male-dominated industry for years, learning how to stand her ground and never back down. And more than that, she had been lifting heavy cargo, cranking landing gear and hauling chains and straps for 8 years. Her arms were strong. Her core was solid. She was not some delicate flower who would just accept being assaulted and walk away. The shorter man was still standing there, too drunk and too stupid to see what was coming. Sarah did not give him a chance to react. She shifted her weight, planted her back foot, and threw a punch with everything she had. Her fist connected with his jaw with a satisfying crack that she felt all the way up her arm. The force of the blow snapped his head to the side and his eyes went wide with shock and pain. He staggered backward, his hands coming up to his face, but Sarah was not done. The anger was still burning inside her, fueled by the throbbing pain in her own face and the violation of being attacked. She stepped forward and hit him again, this time in the stomach. The air rushed out of him in a whoosh and he doubled over, gasping. Sarah grabbed him by the shoulders, using his own momentum against him, and with a strength born of years of physical labor, she spun him around. The shorter man was completely off balance now, his legs wobbly, his arms flailing uselessly. Sarah did not hesitate. She pushed him hard, putting her shoulder into it, shoving him with all the force she could muster. He flew backward, his feet leaving the ground for just a moment, and then he crashed down onto the asphalt parking lot. The sound of his body hitting the pavement was loud and brutal. He landed hard on his back, his head bouncing once against the ground, and then he was still groaning in pain. The tall one was frozen, staring at his friend on the ground. His mouth was hanging open and all the bravado had drained from his face. He looked at Sarah, then back at his friend, then at Sarah again. She stood there breathing hard, her fists still clenched, her face swelling but her eyes blazing with defiance. She was ready for him too if he wanted to try something. But he did not. The tall man held up his hands in a gesture of surrender, backing away slowly. He kept saying it was not his fault, that he did not do anything, that his friend was drunk and stupid. Sarah did not move, just watched him retreat. The shorter man was still on the ground, curling into himself and moaning. Blood was trickling from his mouth where her punch had split his lip. By now a crowd had gathered. Other truckers had come out of the building and were standing around watching. Some of them were already on their phones, probably calling the police. Sarah could hear sirens in the distance getting closer. She relaxed her fists slightly but kept her guard up. The adrenaline was still pumping through her veins, making her hands shake. She touched her face again and winced at the pain. An older trucker with a gray beard approached Sarah carefully, his hands visible and non-threatening. He asked if she was okay, his voice gruff but concerned. Sarah nodded, though her face was throbbing and she could feel her left eye starting to swell shut. She told him she was fine, that she had just defended herself. The older trucker nodded approvingly and said he had seen the whole thing, that those men had started it, that she had every right to protect herself. More people were gathering now, and Sarah could hear them talking amongst themselves. Most of the comments were supportive, saying things like she did what she had to do, that those guys got what they deserved, that it was about time someone taught them a lesson. A few people were checking on the man on the ground, but nobody seemed particularly sympathetic to him. He was still groaning, holding his stomach and his jaw, blood staining his shirt. The tall man had backed all the way to the building, where his third friend had appeared. The two of them were having a heated conversation, with the third man looking angry and shocked. He kept gesturing at Sarah and at his friend on the ground. The tall one was shaking his head, still holding his hands up defensively. It was clear that whatever bravado they had arrived with was completely gone now. The sirens were getting louder, and within minutes 2 police cars pulled into the parking lot, their lights flashing red and blue across the scene. 4 officers got out and they immediately started assessing the situation. One went to the man on the ground while the others began talking to witnesses. An officer approached Sarah, a young woman with sharp eyes and a professional demeanor. She asked Sarah what had happened. Sarah took a deep breath and told her story. She explained how she had been walking back to her truck after dinner, how the 2 men had followed her, how they had blocked her path and grabbed her, and how one of them had punched her in the face. She pointed to her swelling cheek as evidence. Then she told the officer how she had fought back, how she had hit him and pushed him to the ground in self-defense. Her voice was steady as she spoke, even though her hands were still shaking slightly from the adrenaline. The officer listened carefully, taking notes. She asked Sarah a few clarifying questions, then told her to wait there while she talked to other witnesses. Sarah watched as the officer moved through the crowd, speaking to the older trucker who had approached her first, then to several others who had seen the incident. Everyone seemed to be telling the same story, pointing at the 2 men and nodding when they talked about Sarah. The man on the ground was being helped to his feet by paramedics who had arrived shortly after the police. He was still unsteady, holding his jaw and wincing with every movement. The paramedics were checking him over, shining lights in his eyes and asking him questions. Sarah watched without much sympathy. He had hit her first, and as far as she was concerned, he had gotten exactly what he deserved. Another officer approached the tall man and his friend by the building, Sarah could not hear what they were saying, but she could see the officers' expressions growing stern as they listened. The tall man was gesturing animatedly, probably trying to defend himself or shift blame, but the officers did not look convinced. After a few minutes, they called over to the officer who had been talking to Sarah. The female officer came back to Sarah and told her that based on witness statements, it was clear she had been defending herself. The officer said that the man who had hit her would be charged with assault, and possibly his friends as well, for attempting to intimidate and physically restrain her. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had been worried that somehow she would be blamed for putting the man in the hospital, that her act of self-defense would be twisted into something criminal. But the officer reassured her that she had done nothing wrong. In fact, the officer said, she had shown considerable restraint by only defending herself and not continuing to attack the man once he was down. The officer asked if Sarah wanted to press charges, and Sarah said yes without hesitation. She wanted these men to face consequences for what they had done, not just to her, but to however many other women they might have harassed or attacked before. The paramedics finished examining the man on the ground and determined that he needed to go to the hospital. He had a possible concussion from hitting his head on the asphalt, a split lip, and what might be a fractured jaw. They loaded him onto a stretcher and into the ambulance. As they were closing the doors, he looked at Sarah with hatred in his eyes. She stared back at him coolly, showing no emotion. She refused to feel guilty for defending herself. The other paramedics came over to check on Sarah. They examined her face, noting the swelling and the bruising that was already forming. One of them gently prodded her cheekbone and asked if it hurt. Sarah winced but said it was manageable. They recommended she get an X-ray to make sure nothing was broken, and they offered to take her to the hospital. But Sarah declined. She had a schedule to keep, and she did not want to lose any more time. She told them she would ice it and take some pain medication, and if it got worse, she would see a doctor at her next stop. The officers spent another 30 minutes at the scene, finishing their reports and taking statements. The tall man and his friend were arrested and put in the back of one of the police cars. Sarah watched as they were driven away, feeling a grim satisfaction. The third man, who had not been directly involved in the assault, was allowed to leave, though the officers took his information as a witness. Finally, the female officer came back to Sarah one last time. She handed her a card with a case number and told her that someone from the prosecutor's office would be in touch. The officer also told Sarah that she had done the right thing, that standing up to men like that was important, and that she should be proud of herself. Sarah accepted the card and thanked the officer, though she did not feel particularly proud. She just felt tired and sore and ready to be back on the road. As the police cars pulled away and the crowd began to disperse, the older trucker with the gray beard approached Sarah again. He introduced himself as Frank and said he had been driving for 30 years. He told Sarah that what she had done was brave, that a lot of people would have frozen up or tried to run away. He said the trucking community needed more people like her, people who would not back down. Sarah smiled at him despite the pain it caused her swollen face and thanked him for his kind words. Frank offered to buy her a coffee, but Sarah politely declined. She just wanted to get in her truck and drive. She needed the familiar rhythm of the road, the steady hum of the engine, the endless stretch of highway that had always been her refuge. She thanked Frank again and shook his hand, then turned and climbed up into her cab. The inside of the truck felt safe and familiar, a stark contrast to the chaos of the parking lot. Sarah sat in the driver's seat for a moment, looking at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her left cheek was swollen and turning purple, and her eye was nearly swollen shut. She looked like she had been in a bar fight. In a way, she supposed she had. She touched her face gently, wincing at the tenderness, then reached for the ice pack she kept in her cooler for emergencies. Sarah held the ice pack against her face, feeling the cold seep into her skin and numb some of the pain. She sat there in the quiet of her truck, listening to the distant sounds of the truck stop, the rumble of engines, the occasional shout or laugh from other drivers. The adrenaline was finally starting to wear off, leaving her feeling shaky and exhausted. She had not realized how much energy fear and anger could consume until now, when it was all draining away and leaving her feeling hollow. After about 10 minutes, she tossed the ice pack aside and reached for her phone. Her hands were still trembling slightly as she pulled up her sister's number. Rachel answered on the third ring, her voice bright and cheerful. She asked Sarah how the drive was going, if she was on schedule, all the normal questions. For a moment, Sarah considered not telling her what had happened. Rachel worried about her enough as it was, always saying that trucking was dangerous for a woman, that Sarah should find something safer. But Sarah could not keep it in. The words came tumbling out fast and a little disjointed. She told Rachel about the men, about being followed and cornered, about the punch and how she had fought back. She told her about throwing the man to the ground, about the police and the arrests. Rachel was silent for a long moment after Sarah finished, and then she spoke in a voice tight with emotion. She said she was proud of Sarah, but also terrified. She asked if Sarah was okay, if she needed anything, if she should drive out to meet her. Sarah assured her sister that she was fine, that it looked worse than it was, that she had handled it and everything was under control. Rachel made her promise to send pictures so she could see how bad the injury was, and Sarah reluctantly agreed. After they hung up, Sarah took a selfie, wincing at how awful she looked in the harsh glow of the truck's interior lights. Her face was a mess of purple and red, and her eye was swollen to the point where she could barely see out of it. She sent the picture to Rachel, who immediately responded with a string of worried messages. Sarah reassured her again, then put the phone away. She knew she needed to get moving. She was already behind schedule, and sitting here in the parking lot was not going to help. She started the engine, and the familiar rumble vibrated through the seat. It was comforting, that sound. It meant motion and progress and distance from what had just happened. She pulled out of the parking lot carefully, her depth perception thrown off by her swollen eye, and merged back onto the interstate. The highway stretched out before her, dark and empty, except for the occasional passing truck or car. Sarah settled into the rhythm of driving, her hands on the wheel, her eyes on the road. The pain in her face was a constant throb, but she tried to ignore it. She had driven through worse. She had driven with migraines, with the flu, with exhaustion so deep she could barely keep her eyes open. This was just one more thing to push through. But as the miles rolled by, Sarah found her mind wandering back to the parking lot, replaying the events over and over. She thought about the moment the man's fist had connected with her face, the shock and pain of it. She thought about the anger that had surged up inside her, hot and overwhelming. She thought about the satisfying crunch of her fist hitting his jaw, the look of surprise in his eyes, and she thought about the way he had fallen, hard and helpless, onto the asphalt. Part of her felt guilty for that satisfaction. She was not a violent person by nature. She had never been in a real fight before, nothing more serious than scuffles with her brothers when they were kids, but another part of her felt no guilt at all. That man had attacked her, had put his hands on her, had violated her sense of safety. He had deserved what he got and more. Sarah found herself gripping the steering wheel tighter, her jaw clenched as anger flared up again. She forced herself to take a deep breath and relax. Getting angry again would not help anything. She needed to stay calm and focused. She had hours of driving ahead of her, and she could not afford to let her emotions distract her. She turned on the radio, searching for something to take her mind off things. A country station came on, playing some song about heartbreak and whiskey. Sarah usually enjoyed country music, but tonight it felt too melancholy. She switched to a rock station instead, letting the driving beat fill the cab. As the night wore on, Sarah stopped twice more, once for fuel and once at a rest area to use the bathroom and grab more ice for her face. At the fuel stop, the attendant did a double take when he saw her face, asking if she was okay. Sarah gave him a tight smile and said she had handled it, leaving it at that. The attendant looked like he wanted to ask more questions, but he wisely decided against it and just processed her payment. At the rest area, she ran into another female trucker, a woman named Maria, who Sarah had met a few times at various stops over the years. Maria took one look at Sarah's face and her eyes went wide. She immediately demanded to know what had happened, if Sarah needed help, if the person who did it had been caught. Sarah appreciated the concern and gave Maria a brief version of the story. Maria listened with growing anger, cursing the men who had attacked Sarah and praising her for fighting back. Maria insisted on buying Sarah a coffee and sitting with her for a few minutes. They sat at one of the outdoor picnic tables, the cool night air refreshing after the stuffiness of the truck. Maria shared her own stories of being harassed and threatened over the years, though she said she had never actually been hit. She told Sarah that every woman in the trucking industry had stories like these, that it was an unfortunate reality of the job. But Maria also said that fighting back like Sarah had done was important. It showed that women would not just accept being victims. The conversation was therapeutic in a way that Sarah had not expected. Talking to someone who understood the specific challenges of being a woman in trucking made her feel less alone. Maria gave her some advice about dealing with the pain, suggesting specific over-the-counter medications and techniques for reducing swelling. They exchanged numbers and promised to stay in touch more regularly. When they finally parted ways, Sarah felt a little lighter, a little less burdened by what had happened. Back on the road, Sarah found her second wind. The coffee and the conversation had energized her, and she felt like she could drive for hours more. The sky was starting to lighten in the east, the first hints of dawn painting the horizon in shades of pink and orange. Sarah had always loved this time of morning, when the world was quiet and peaceful, when it felt like she had the entire highway to herself. She thought about her life, about the choices that had led her to become a trucker. It had not been a conventional path. She had grown up in a small town, the only girl in a family of boys, and she had always been something of a tomboy. While other girls were playing with dolls, Sarah had been helping her father work on cars and tractors. She had loved the smell of engine oil, the satisfaction of fixing something broken, the sense of independence that came with understanding how machines worked. After high school, Sarah had drifted through a few different jobs, never finding anything that felt right. Office work was too confining, retail was too tedious, and college had never appealed to her. Then one day, she had met a trucker at a diner who had told her about the job. He had painted a picture of freedom and adventure, of seeing the country and being your own boss. It had sounded perfect. Sarah had enrolled in a truck driving school, earning her commercial license within a few months. Her family had been skeptical at first, especially her mother, who worried about her daughter being alone on dangerous highways. But Sarah had been determined, and she had proven herself capable from the start. She had worked for a large shipping company initially, learning the ropes and building her reputation. After a few years, she had gone independent, contracting her services to various companies and choosing her own routes. It had not always been easy. The hours were long, the pay was sometimes inconsistent, and the lifestyle was lonely. There were days when she missed having a normal home, a regular schedule, people to come back to at the end of the day. But there were also moments of incredible beauty and freedom that made it all worthwhile. Watching the sunrise over the desert, driving through mountains with snow-capped peaks, seeing parts of the country that most people only read about. These were the things that kept her going. And now, after 8 years, Sarah could not imagine doing anything else. This was who she was. She was a trucker, a woman who drove big rigs across the country, who was not afraid of hard work or long hours or difficult situations. Tonight had proven that she could handle herself in the worst circumstances, that she was stronger than she had even realized. The thought made her sit up a little straighter in her seat, made her push down a little harder on the accelerator. By the time the sun was fully up, Sarah was crossing the state line into Arkansas. She had made good time despite the delay at the truck stop, and she was back on schedule. Her face still hurt, and she could not wait to take more pain medication at her next stop. But she felt oddly good, alive, empowered, like she had faced something terrible and come out the other side stronger. Her phone rang, and Sarah glanced at the display. It was her dispatcher, probably calling to check on her progress. She answered using her hands-free device, and his gruff voice filled the cab. He asked where she was and if everything was on track. Sarah confirmed her location and estimated arrival time, not mentioning the incident from the night before. She figured she would tell him later, after the delivery was made. He grunted approvingly and told her to keep up the good work before hanging up. Sarah continued driving, the landscape changing around her as she moved deeper into Arkansas. The flat farmland of Mississippi gave way to rolling hills and dense forests. The morning traffic picked up as people started their commutes, and Sarah navigated around slower cars and trucks with practiced ease. Her body was running on autopilot now, her hands and feet making the tiny adjustments needed to keep the massive truck moving smoothly. She stopped for breakfast at a small diner off the highway, a place that advertised homemade biscuits and gravy. Inside, the diner was exactly what she expected: checkered tablecloths and vinyl booths, country music playing softly from a jukebox in the corner. An older waitress with kind eyes seated her and handed her a menu, then did a visible double-take when she saw Sarah's face. Sarah could tell the woman wanted to ask questions, but she just said she hoped the other person looked worse and went to get coffee. Sarah ordered the biscuits and gravy with scrambled eggs and hash browns, and when it arrived, she ate hungrily. Fighting and adrenaline apparently burned a lot of calories. The food was delicious, the kind of simple, hearty meal that stuck to your ribs and gave you energy for the day ahead. As she ate, Sarah noticed that other patrons kept glancing at her, their eyes drawn to her battered face. She ignored them, focusing on her food and her phone, which was buzzing with messages from Rachel checking in again. After breakfast, Sarah bought a bottle of ibuprofen from the convenience store attached to the diner and took 3 pills with a bottle of water. She also grabbed a couple of energy drinks for later, knowing she would need them to stay alert as the day wore on. Back in her truck, she checked her route one more time, then pulled back onto the highway. She had about 6 more hours of driving before she reached her destination in Little Rock, where she would unload her cargo of machine parts at a manufacturing plant. The miles passed steadily, and Sarah found herself thinking about what came next. The police had said someone from the prosecutor's office would contact her, which meant she might have to testify in court. The thought made her nervous. She had never testified in court before, had never even been inside a courtroom except for a speeding ticket years ago, but she knew it was important. If she did not follow through, those men might get away with what they had done, and they might do it to someone else. She thought about all the women who had been in similar situations, who had been harassed or attacked and had not fought back, either because they were too scared or because they did not think anyone would believe them. Sarah understood that fear. Even now, even after defending herself successfully, there was a small voice in the back of her mind questioning whether she had done the right thing, whether people would blame her somehow. But she pushed that voice away. She had done nothing wrong. She had been attacked and she had defended herself. That was her right. As she drove through the Arkansas countryside, Sarah noticed a sign for a small town called Mountain View. On a whim, she decided to take a short detour. She had heard about this town before, how it was known for its folk music and traditional crafts. She had always meant to visit but had never found the time. Today felt like the right day for it. She needed a break from the highway, a reminder that there was more to life than just driving and delivering cargo. She exited the highway and followed the signs into town. Mountain View was charming in a way that made Sarah smile despite her sore face. The main street was lined with small shops selling handmade quilts, pottery, and musical instruments. There was a courthouse square with a gazebo, and she could hear the sound of fiddle music coming from somewhere nearby. Sarah parked her truck on a side street and climbed down, feeling the stiffness in her legs from hours of sitting. She walked slowly through the town square, taking in the sights and sounds. A group of older men were sitting on benches near the gazebo, playing guitars and banjos. They were not performing for anyone in particular, just playing for the joy of it. Sarah stood and listened for a few minutes, letting the music wash over her. It was peaceful and timeless, a stark contrast to the violence and chaos of the night before. A few people noticed her bruised face and gave her sympathetic looks, but nobody asked questions. Sarah appreciated that. She did not want to talk about it anymore, did not want to relive it. She just wanted to enjoy this moment of quiet normalcy. She bought a hand-carved wooden bird from one of the craft shops, something small that she could keep in her truck as a reminder of this day. This place, this feeling of finding peace after turmoil. After about an hour, Sarah returned to her truck and got back on the road. The detour had cost her some time, but it had been worth it. She felt refreshed and centered, ready to finish the drive to Little Rock. The afternoon sun was warm on her face as she merged back onto the highway, and despite everything that had happened, Sarah felt grateful. Grateful to be alive, to be strong, to be free. The road stretched out ahead of her, full of possibility and promise, and Sarah drove forward into whatever came next. Sarah arrived at the manufacturing plant in Little Rock just after 3 in the afternoon. The facility was massive, with several loading docks and warehouses spread across what looked like several city blocks. She pulled up to the guard station at the entrance and showed her delivery paperwork. The security guard checked her information, glanced at her bruised face with concern, but said nothing. He handed back her documents and directed her to dock number 7. Backing an 18-wheeler into a loading dock was always a challenge, requiring precision and patience. Sarah had done it hundreds of times, but with one eye nearly swollen shut, her depth perception was off. She took it slow, using her mirrors carefully, making tiny adjustments until the truck was perfectly aligned with the dock. When she finally heard the satisfying thunk of the truck settling into position, she allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. The warehouse workers came out to unload the cargo, and Sarah filled out the necessary paperwork while they worked. One of the workers, a young man with a clipboard, asked if she wanted anything from the break room while she waited. Sarah thanked him and said coffee would be great if they had any. He disappeared and returned a few minutes later with a styrofoam cup of coffee and a concerned expression. He asked what had happened to her face, and Sarah gave him the abbreviated version, leaving out most of the details. The young man listened with wide eyes, then said she was brave for fighting back. He told her that his sister had been attacked a few years ago and had not been able to defend herself, and it had taken her a long time to feel safe again. Sarah felt a pang of sympathy for this stranger's sister, for all the women who had been in similar situations and had not been able to fight back. She told the young man that she was sorry about his sister, and that she hoped she was doing better now. He nodded and said she was, thanks for asking. The unloading took about an hour, and once it was complete, Sarah inspected the dock to make sure everything had been removed properly. She signed off on the delivery confirmation, and the warehouse supervisor handed her a copy for her records. He also gave her an envelope with a check for the delivery, which Sarah tucked safely into her logbook. Payment on delivery was always satisfying, a tangible reward for the work she had done. With the cargo delivered and the paperwork complete, Sarah was officially ahead of schedule. Her next pickup was not until the following morning in Memphis, which was only about 2 hours away. She could drive there tonight and get a hotel room, sleep in an actual bed instead of the cramped sleeper berth in her truck. The thought was appealing. Her body was aching from the fight and the long hours of driving, and her face was throbbing despite the pain medication. She pulled out of the manufacturing plant and found a truck stop with a good reputation on the outskirts of Little Rock. After fueling up and grabbing dinner from the attached restaurant, Sarah started the drive to Memphis. The traffic was moderate and she made good time, arriving at a truck-friendly hotel just after 7 in the evening. The hotel was nothing fancy, but it was clean and safe, and that was all Sarah needed. She checked in at the front desk and the clerk barely glanced at her face before handing over a room key. Sarah was grateful for the lack of questions. She took the elevator to the 3rd floor and found her room at the end of the hallway. Inside, the room was exactly what she expected. Standard hotel furniture, bland artwork on the walls, a television that probably had too many channels. But it had a real bed with clean sheets and a bathroom with a shower. And that was luxury enough for Sarah. She dropped her bag on the floor and immediately went to the bathroom to examine her face in better light. The mirror confirmed what she already knew. She looked terrible. The left side of her face was a kaleidoscope of purple, blue, and yellow bruises. Her eye was swollen almost completely shut, and there was a small cut on her cheekbone that she had not noticed before. She carefully washed her face with cool water, being gentle around the bruised areas, then applied some antibiotic ointment to the cut. After a long, hot shower that helped ease some of the tension in her muscles, Sarah wrapped herself in the hotel bathrobe and sat on the edge of the bed. She turned on the television but did not really watch it. Just let the background noise fill the room. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her messages. Rachel had sent several more worried texts along with some articles about self-defense and legal rights. Sarah appreciated her sister's concern, even if it was a bit overwhelming. There were also messages from a few other truckers she knew, word apparently having spread through the community about what had happened. Most of the messages were supportive, offering encouragement and sharing their own stories of harassment and confrontation. One message in particular stood out, from an older female trucker named Betty who Sarah had met at a convention a few years back. Betty wrote that she was proud of Sarah for standing her ground, and that the trucking community needed more women who would not be intimidated. She also warned Sarah that there might be some backlash, that some people would criticize her for being violent, but that Sarah should ignore them. Sarah had not thought about potential backlash, and the idea unsettled her. She imagined people on social media tearing her apart, saying she had overreacted, that she should have just called for help instead of fighting. But then she remembered the feeling of that man's fist connecting with her face, the fear and anger that had surged through her, and she knew she had done the only thing she could do in that moment. She had protected herself, and she refused to feel ashamed of that. She set her phone aside and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The events of the past 24 hours played through her mind like a movie she could not turn off. She saw the parking lot, the men approaching her, the punch, her own retaliation. She saw the man falling to the asphalt, heard the sound of his body hitting the ground. Part of her still could not believe it had really happened, that she had actually been in a physical altercation. It felt surreal, like something from someone else's life, but it was not someone else's life. It was hers. And she had to figure out how to process it and move forward. Sarah knew that what had happened would change her in some way, would make her more cautious, more aware of her surroundings. But she also knew that it would not make her afraid. She refused to let those men take that from her, refused to let them make her question her choice to live this life on the road. If anything, the experience had made her more determined to continue, to prove that women could thrive in this industry despite the challenges. Eventually, exhaustion overtook her, and Sarah drifted off to sleep with the television still playing softly in the background. She dreamed of highways and open skies, of driving through landscapes that shifted and changed with every mile. In her dreams, her face did not hurt, and she was free and strong and unstoppable. Sarah woke up early the next morning, the sunlight streaming through a gap in the curtains. For a moment, she forgot where she was, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then the pain in her face reminded her of everything, and the memories came flooding back. She groaned and rolled over, checking the time on her phone. It was 6:30, which gave her plenty of time to get ready before her 10 o'clock pickup in Memphis. She got up slowly, feeling stiff and sore all over. The fight had taken more out of her than she had realized. Her muscles ached, and her knuckles were bruised from where she had hit the man, but her face was what hurt the most. A constant throbbing pain that made her wince every time she moved. She went to the bathroom and examined herself in the mirror again. If anything, the bruising looked worse today, the colors more vivid, the swelling more pronounced. Sarah took another long shower, letting the hot water work its magic on her sore muscles. She dressed in clean clothes from her bag, simple jeans and a flannel shirt, and pulled her hair back into a ponytail. Normally she would skip makeup, but today she attempted to use some concealer to cover the worst of the bruising. It did not help much, but it made her feel slightly better to at least try. She packed up her things, checked out of the hotel, and headed to her truck. The drive to the pickup location in Memphis was uneventful. Sarah navigated the morning traffic with ease, her mind already planning the route for the next leg of her journey. The pickup was at a furniture warehouse, and she was transporting a load of office furniture to Dallas. It was a straightforward job, the kind she had done countless times before. She arrived at the warehouse 15 minutes early and checked in with the loading supervisor. While the workers loaded her truck, Sarah sat in the cab and returned some of the messages she had received the night before. She thanked people for their support and assured them she was doing fine. She also called her dispatcher to give him a proper update, finally telling him about the incident at the truck stop. He was surprisingly sympathetic, asking if she needed time off or if she wanted to file any reports with the company. Sarah declined, saying she just wanted to keep working and put it behind her. Her phone rang again, and this time it was an unknown number with a local area code. Sarah hesitated for a moment before answering. A professional-sounding woman identified herself as an assistant district attorney from the county where the incident had occurred. She said she was calling to discuss the case and to get Sarah's statement. Sarah took a deep breath and recounted the entire story once more, providing as much detail as she could remember. The assistant district attorney listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions. She told Sarah that the man who had hit her was being charged with assault and battery, and that his friend was being charged as an accomplice for helping to block her path and intimidate her. The DA said the case was strong, especially with all the witness statements supporting Sarah's version of events. She asked if Sarah would be willing to testify if the case went to trial, and Sarah said yes without hesitation. The conversation lasted about 20 minutes, and by the time it was over, the workers had finished loading Sarah's truck. She did a quick inspection to make sure everything was secured properly, signed the paperwork, and climbed back into the cab. As she pulled out of the warehouse parking lot, Sarah felt a sense of closure beginning to settle over her. The legal process was moving forward, and she had done everything she needed to do on her end. Now she just had to focus on her work and let justice take its course. The drive to Dallas took most of the day. Sarah stopped twice for fuel and food, and each time she was met with curious stares and occasional expressions of concern. She had gotten used to the attention by now and just ignored it. At one stop, a young woman approached her and said she had heard about what happened through the trucker network. The woman told Sarah she was an inspiration, that hearing her story had made her feel braver about pursuing her own CDL license. Sarah was touched by the comment and encouraged the woman to follow her dreams, telling her the industry needed more women. By the time Sarah reached Dallas, it was early evening. She delivered the furniture to an office building downtown, navigating the tight city streets with practiced skill. The unloading went smoothly, and she collected her payment without incident. With the job complete, Sarah decided to find a quiet place to park for the night. She was exhausted, physically and emotionally, and she needed rest. She found a truck stop on the outskirts of the city that had good reviews for security. After parking her truck in a well-lit area near the main building, Sarah went inside and bought supplies for dinner: a sandwich, some chips, and a bottle of juice. She also picked up a local newspaper, curious to see if there was any coverage of the incident. There was not, which both relieved and disappointed her. She was not sure if she wanted the attention or not. Back in her truck, Sarah ate her dinner while scrolling through social media on her phone. To her surprise, a video of the incident had been posted online. Someone at the truck stop had recorded part of the confrontation on their phone, and it had been shared widely across several trucking forums and Facebook groups. Sarah watched the video with a mixture of emotions. It showed the moment she had hit the man and pushed him to the ground, and it clearly captured his aggression toward her beforehand. The comments on the video were overwhelmingly supportive. People were calling her a hero, praising her for standing up for herself and sharing their own stories of harassment and assault. A few comments were negative, accusing her of being too violent or saying she should have handled it differently, but those were drowned out by the positive responses. Sarah read through dozens of comments, feeling both validated and overwhelmed by the attention. She set her phone down and leaned back in her seat, looking out at the darkening sky. The sun had set and stars were beginning to appear overhead. Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, all the roads she had traveled, all the challenges she had overcome. This was just one more chapter in her story, one more obstacle that she had faced and conquered. Tomorrow she would wake up and drive again, continuing the endless cycle of pickups and deliveries that defined her life. Her face would heal, the bruises would fade, and eventually this would become just another story she told at truck stops and rest areas. But for now, sitting in the quiet comfort of her cab, Sarah allowed herself to feel proud. Proud of her strength, proud of her courage, proud of the woman she had become. She closed her eyes and whispered a quiet thank you to whatever forces had kept her safe, had given her the strength to fight back, had brought her through the darkness and into the light. And then, with the steady hum of distant traffic as her lullaby, Sarah Mitchell fell asleep, ready to face whatever tomorrow would bring on the open road ahead.